No More Martyrs was launched in 2014 when we lost 3 notable Black women in the media to suicide. They were Simone Battle from The X Factor, TT Branch, who was the co-founder of Miss Jessie's hair products, and Karen Washington, who was the founder of a blog called For Brown Girls. At the time, I had just finished my graduate studies, and my focus and my research was on the experiences of Black female college students with mental health concerns. This concept of how Black women are socially and societally expected to be strong at all times, and will adhere to this concept of the strong Black woman to our own deficit. And so in a sense, we are martyring ourselves by trying to carry our entire communities on our backs. When we lost those 3 wonderful women to suicide in 2014, I wanted to use No More Martyrs to foster that conversation. There was a reporter who actually highlighted Karen Washington, and at the end of his study, or the end of his article, he mentioned, Karen will always be remembered as a martyr for the work that she did on behalf of the Black community, but the issue is that we don't need any. And for me, I read that and thought, yes, we don't need any more martyrs. And that's how the concept of No More Martyrs came about. The No More Martyrs approach to mental health awareness and advocacy has a number of different approaches. One is building awareness and education of mental health symptoms, as well as strategies for utilizing services. But there's also this social justice approach in which we address injustices that wreak havoc on our mental well-being. And in light of some of the racial injustices, as far as the disproportionate number of Black individuals who are lost to police shootings, that wreaks havoc on our mental well-being.
Today, we are really trying to shift the narrative to have a different mental model and to really incorporate empathy to humanize the experience of people that have been plagued for over 400 years of oppression. And the historical trauma is important. However, we leave it out of the narrative of history.
We really want to focus on building awareness around what mental illness looks like, what are some of the strategies for tapping into services, and how to promote self-care, but also to take the conversation a step further and recognize that injustice impacts our mental health. We started the morning at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, then did a visit to the 16th Street Baptist Church, and now we're here visiting the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama.
These were mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and all of our ancestors and all of us as a community were deeply affected psychologically.
It was really interesting to learn a little bit more about the civil rights movement and what our ancestors fought for to make today possible for all of us. And to learn more about that is really crucial to mental well-being. To understand your past is the best lens into your present and your future.
What you'll see today here, but also in Montgomery, you'll see many people's stories. You'll hear about what had happened to them, and it should ring to you of what it can actually bring a change in yourself.
What No More Martyrs is doing with this tour is really shifting the narrative of how we see mental health. We thought that mental health was just something that was pathologized by going to the doctor and simply depression. This gives a communal view of how trauma affects our communities and how you can actually have an intervention of advocacy to really influence the way you live and work and play and go throughout your life without having to feel afraid.
This is a healing, in my opinion. You get to see some of the things that have happened, you process it. It may not hit you until later tonight or a week from now, but something that you've seen in these museums is not just a museum, just look at a picture and say, oh, that's interesting. It actually can have an emotional response. And I think this reunites some of these deep feelings that we've had for years.
Behind me is our soil collection exhibit for the state of Alabama. The soil collection display is a part of our community remembrance projects, but it serves as a memorial to the over 360 victims, African American victims of racial terror lynching that we were able to document here in our state. And so for each jar of soil, they represent a personal memorial to that individual, and they also speak to our commitment to remembering and telling that story more faithfully.
When I talk about law enforcement engagement with minority populations, this matters to our mental health. This is why it was so important for us to have the opportunity to meet with the Equal Justice Initiative, because the work that they're doing to highlight the injustices that are impact marginalized as well as minority populations impact our mental health from generation to generation to generation.
Racial-based trauma is a traumatic stressor that's outside of your normal scope of coping due to a racial-based encounter. You can tell when something's happened due to hyperarousal. Also, it causes an internal sense of inferiority and also an internalized idea of oppression.
It could be racial harassment. It could be the witnessing of a violent act, police brutality. It could also be just the racial injustice from institutionalized racism.
A large part of EJI's efforts and work is to document how historical trauma has left us with the contemporary crisis we see today. We think about it really as a nation, a national history of trauma. It's not just a contemporary issue, it's not just people needing to, if we could just move on, but rather this reality that we haven't actually addressed the hurts and the harms as effectively as we needed to throughout that history, and until we do, we can't actually effectively move forward towards reconciliation or healing.
In 2016, Michelle Shirley was lost in a police shooting. Michelle Shirley was a recent law school graduate as well as someone who identified as living with mental illness. Not only was she an advocate for mental illness and mental health awareness, she had served and used her own voice in public service announcements and held workshops on awareness. Unfortunately, she went into distress behind the wheel of her car. Her behavior was interpreted as erratic and she was shot and killed. The issue with this is that statistically, research would tell us that considerations in regards to brown and black individuals who go into distress or manage these kind of concerns, especially if they're related to mental health, is that they're more likely to be shot and killed by the police versus being engaged and having the situation de-escalated.
More Martyrs has really taken the lead in making sure that people understand how we can help ourselves right now.
Tours like this, conversations, that No More Martyrs are bringing up really speak to not just current issues, but also generational issues that have to do with mental health in minority communities.
What I've seen, even in one of the young ladies in the trip at the Civil Rights Museum saw the pictures of the KKK, and then she shared that they were traumatized in North Carolina by that particular group, and it brought it back, just seeing that picture. And she had a difficult time, had to sit down. You know, we held her for a minute and she was able to move on. So it's a very good process of healing.
It's all interconnected, and what's happening now, it's nothing new under the sun, as we would say. So if we don't know our past, we're not able to use medical models or even mental health models as an intervention to help our current state of mind. And people are dying due to stigma of mental health, and trauma is one of those stigmas.
So the work of No More Martyrs and actually wanting to bring attention to these issues, to want to think about how mental health trauma, particularly in community of color, is not just related to a person's individual circumstances, but has had systemic influences, the ways in which those influences are informed by our history, informed by the injustices around our nation's history of racial and economic injustice, really speaks to the need of advocacy on behalf of those communities, and we're very grateful for organizations like No More Martyrs who are willing to carry that story into spaces that those communities might not find themselves in. So being able to be a voice for those who are often voiceless, all those efforts are essential if we want to actually move forward to a more just society.
It's a much needed conversation. You don't have to be just a minority to be involved in these conversations. It is about all of us, and I really implore anyone to really check out the great work that No More Martyrs is doing.
Really addressing this in a very unapologetic manner and highlighting it in a way where it's really in your face. It is a call to action for us to acknowledge this as a part of our shared past, but also empower us to move forward to create environments where injustices are addressed directly, because that's going to foster our mental well-being.